do expect that when we table the fall economic statement on Monday, the debt to GDP ratio for 23-24, which we put forward in the 24 budget, will be met.
Tomorrow, the Liberal government, as we've been talking about, will unveil its highly anticipated fall economic statement. It will give Canadians a look at federal finances and show if the government is in fact sticking to its self-prescribed fiscal guardrails. What can we expect? Sahir Khan was the Assistant Parliamentary Budget Officer from 2008 to 2013. He's now the Executive Vice President at the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy, and I talked to him a bit earlier. Sahir Khan, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Rosemary.
You and I are going to talk on Monday. We're going to talk tomorrow, but give me a sense of what you're going to be watching for in the fall economic statement.
Well, based on some of the noise we hear in Parliament, the media the last little while, I think there'll be a headline deficit number that I think everyone's really fixated on. And I think that's one kind of important aspect of this that we'll all keep an eye on, and we'll try to put in a little bit of context. I also think from a policy point of view, at some point, this government's going to have to make a pivot. And what I'm looking for is, are we going to see a shift from affordability to growth, from consumption to investment? And this is something we really haven't seen since 2015. There's been a great deal of emphasis on social policy and consumption. We need an economy, an engine that actually drives revenue for the government to afford the progressive policies.
Okay, so let's break down a couple of those things then, I guess. I'm going to start with the deficit. It was $40 billion, or just over $40 billion last fiscal. The PBO is now saying it'll be slightly more, but there are big numbers bouncing around Ottawa too. I've heard as much as $60 billion. What is at stake for the Canadian economy if we get to those kinds of big numbers? Well,
in a way, not much. I wouldn't be angry, I'd be disappointed, kind of like my parents might be, because I think it's important to put those numbers in a little bit of context. This is a $3 trillion economy. So a deficit, 30, 40, 50, 60, is not that big relative to the size of the economy and frankly, relative to a lot of the peer countries in the G7. Yeah. The problem with a deficit that's larger than $40 billion, a little bit or a lot, is what it does to confidence. And the confidence in Canadians and their government is that this government has kind of departed from what I would argue is kind of a social contract. From Jean Chrétien to Paul Martin, Stephen Harper, the federal government was about 12 to 13% of GDP, of the size of the economy. And so we had a kind of a consensus of the size of the state. The government now is, 15 to 16% level of spending relative to GDP. So it's a bigger state. The government's bigger. And so the public rightfully expects performance. You want results for that money. And when you set a target, and it's the government's, decision to establish a target and say we're expecting $40 billion, that kind of sets in kind of a marker. So you go past it and you're going to be open for criticism. So I think there's a political issue. I think there's a confidence issue. And the broad economic, issue is going to be that, hey, it's not great. It's not the worst thing, but what are you doing to follow up? Like, are you going to keep spending money for consumption? Or at some point, are we going to prepare ourselves for the new economic environment, and in particular for a Trump presidency?
So the other guardrail that the finance minister has mentioned and that she assures will be met in the statement is the debt to GDP ratio. So the economy has grown, the size of government as well, I take your point, but the economy overall has grown. So is that a sign that they are doing anything right here, or is that just that this is a really flexible guardrail?
Well, the guardrail for this government has always been a little bit flexible. Declining debt to GDP is a pretty soft anchor to have. They've really benefited from positive revenue surprises, budget after budget, and so they've spent into that room. They've used it up and still shown a declining debt to GDP. The other thing you can notice is every time you see a budget or fiscal update, you'll see that the spending track is expected to decline, in some cases showing almost balance. But that assumes that in the next year there'll be no new spending. Mm-hmm. And so what this government typically has done is there's been additional revenue, they've used that space. So now with the slower economy for the first time in a long time, or outside the COVID period, we're seeing a government that possibly could end up with less revenue than expected even in the spring. And that's going to have at least political ramifications, but it should probably also have policy ones. And I think that's the other thing that I'm really looking for.
So some of the areas where they are going to spend, obviously the GST holiday, which started on Saturday, costing more than $1 billion. The rebate checks are very pricey. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but we'll see. But tell me how you think those measures either make sense or don't make sense for the economy right now.
Well, that's the type of measure that it's like candy. It tastes good. It has no nutritional value. It's not the worst thing, because when we think about long-term fiscal sustainability, it's not an expenditure that they've baked in for a long time that's kind of permanent. It's short-term. So it could be good politics. I don't know. It's not terribly good policy. But mercifully, it's for a short period of time. What it does do, though, is it kind of crowds out other opportunities that this government might have to start pivoting to a strategy focused on investment and growing the economy.
So let's talk about that to end then. As you say, part of what we're also expecting is a response to Donald Trump, potentially as much as $1 billion in border security and other things. How is that piece that you're talking about, growth and investment, how would that also help counter anything that might be coming down the road from Donald Trump? Well,
it's hard to tell right now if the trade threats are just that, just threats to position for a negotiation for the trade agreement between Canada and the United States and Mexico. What it does do, it tells us that we've got to do a few things to get our own house in order. Having fiscal firepower, having space fiscally is important for that. It helped prepare Canada for COVID and the response. That's important. I think having the largest internal economy that we can have is really important. So I'd urge premiers to look at those interprovincial trade barriers and figure out, can we create a larger economy, domestic economy, and trade zone, and then looking to diversify our trade. But I think having growth and being a reliable partner inside an economic security zone with the United States, that case has to be made. And that's going to take investments. What do we have that's of value to the United States that makes them want to have us as part of their bubble facing a trade war with China? And we still have investments to make, and we can argue that there's oil and water and other natural resources that they need, but do we really have things in manufacturing and services that make us a valuable partner? So that kind of work still has to be done, and meeting them halfway on issues around border and security and defense, that's going to also mean more fiscal pressure. So as difficult as Monday might be for this federal government, looking forward to the next budget, you're going to have to start to bake in all of those policy pressures into an expenditure plan. And that means that for this government and possibly for the next one, the books are going to start to look a little worse than anyone might have thought about a year ago.
Okay, Sahir Khan, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.
Will do. All right. Take care.